In the year 1819, in a small Appalachian town, something happened that people would whisper about for generations, a tale carried on winter winds and spoken softly beside hearth fires long after the boy himself was gone. It began with a shout that split the quiet valley at dusk, a cry that sent lanterns swinging and boots pounding against frozen earth. And before the night was through, trust itself would lie bleeding in the snow. They said the mountains heard everything, that stone and pine kept the truth even when men did not. And in that season of early frost, the mountains were listening very closely indeed. For what happened in that narrow valley was not the work of wolves or wandering spirits, but of a single restless heart and the hunger to be seen by an entire town. Autumn had settled heavily over Briar's Hollow, laying copper leaves across the narrow road and frosting the riverbanks each morning, while wood smoke drifted from stone chimneys and the scent of pine resin clung to the cool air. The town was no more than a scatter of timber cabins and a whitewashed meeting house, pressed between steep ridges and thick forest, where owls called at dusk and the river muttered endlessly over smooth gray stones. Fields of corn stood harvested and bound. Pumpkins rested in neat rows beside split-rail fences, and the last apples clung stubbornly to bent orchard branches beneath a pale and watchful sky. Men worked by lantern light in the sawmill near the river bend, their axes ringing sharp against oak and chestnut, while women stitched by firelight, mending coats for the coming winter. Children were warned not to wander beyond the tree line, for black bears still roamed the higher slopes. And now and then a wolf's distant howl reminded everyone that the wilderness pressed close. Among those children was Caleb Turner, a thin boy of 14 with straw-colored hair that never lay flat and sharp gray eyes that seemed always searching for something just beyond reach. He wore boots too large for his narrow feet and a patched wool coat inherited from his older brother, sleeves rolled at the wrist and elbows shiny from years of wear. Caleb was quick with chores and quicker with words, known for tales told beside the general store, where he would mimic travelers and exaggerate small happenings into grand adventures. He had a gift for storytelling that drew laughter from the blacksmith and wide eyes from younger children, yet beneath the charm lay a restless ache to be admired. His father, a quiet farmer hardened by years of rocky soil and harsher winters, often warned him, "A man's name is worth more than his harvest. Boy, guard it well." But Caleb felt invisible in a town where every family had endured hardship, where bravery meant surviving storms and sickness, and he longed for a moment when every lantern would burn for him. As the nights grew colder and the wind carried the scent of snow from distant peaks, that longing began to shape itself into something sharper, something that would soon test the patience of Briar's Hollow. One evening, Caleb lingered by the river, watching the water swirl around jagged stones, and imagined a story so grand it would make the town tremble with wonder, though not a word of truth lay in it. He told of a shadow he had seen moving among the pines, taller than a man and cloaked in firelight, glimpsed only when the wind whispered through the trees just so. The children gasped, eyes wide as he described glowing eyes that followed travelers and low growls that shook the ground, and for the first time, Caleb felt their awe settle upon him. "Did it come close to the miller's cabin?" a girl asked, clutching her scarf, and Caleb nodded gravely, imagining the tale stretching like smoke across the valley. He began visiting the general store, telling merchants of stolen horses, hidden treasure, and mysterious strangers in the night, each story taller than the last, each carefully embroidered with fear and wonder. The townsfolk, polite but curious, leaned closer as he spoke, eyebrows furrowed, whispers passing from one cabin to the next, until even the elders nodded gravely at his warnings. "Perhaps you saw it, Caleb," the blacksmith said one night. Hammer paused mid-swing. "Or perhaps your imagination grows faster than the corn in our fields." Caleb grinned, not correcting him, for he realized the thrill of being feared and admired outweighed the truth, and he could sense the town hanging on his every word. Soon, he claimed to have discovered a secret passage in the forest where gold coins were buried beneath roots, and villagers began wandering the tree line, lanterns trembling in anticipation of hidden treasure. "Be careful, Caleb," his mother warned quietly, folding laundry by candlelight. "Stories can turn on a boy faster than winter storms turn on the river." He laughed, brushing her concern aside, imagining himself a legend, a boy whose tales could bend the valley itself, while the wind rattled the shutters with a warning he refused to hear. Night after night, his stories grew darker, hinting at spirits watching and punishing those who failed to heed his words, and soon even the most skeptical neighbors hesitated at the edge of the woods. Caleb noticed the change, a quiet power settling over him, and the thrill became almost unbearable, each glance toward the meeting house or tavern a reminder of his newfound influence. Yet, deep in the hollow, a knot of unease began to tighten, for while he reveled in attention, small signs hinted that the forest itself had begun to answer back, shadows moving just beyond the torchlight. One evening, near the frozen river, a wolf's howl cut closer than ever before, and the boy's pulse quickened, half in fear, half in delight, unsure if the voice of the wild had joined his story or threatened it. He told the villagers that the wolf was no ordinary beast, but a guardian of the forest, a creature that would punish those who strayed from their chores or lied to neighbors, and their eyes grew wide in belief. By now, even his father whispered to himself while chopping wood, worried at the tales Caleb spun, while the boy stood nearby, pretending innocence, yet secretly enjoying the stir he had caused in the valley. Late one night, Caleb wandered alone into the woods, lantern swinging, imagining himself the hero of his own narrative, unaware that the forest had grown patient, waiting for his next embellishment to cross a dangerous line. The shadows of pine and oak stretched long across snow-dusted ground, twisting with each step he took, and somewhere deep inside, a voice, soft and ancient, seemed to murmur, warning him to choose truth before stories chose him. By the first snowfall, the town was restless, lanterns swinging in every window, as neighbors whispered of wolves stalking barns and shadows moving beneath the snow-laden trees, all traced back to Caleb's tales. Farmers found fences torn, goats missing, and footprints they could not explain, and soon they began murmuring. Perhaps the boy's stories are waking the forest itself, though none dared accuse him aloud. Caleb watched from the ridge, delight in his chest, as men followed phantom trails and women pressed hands to mouths, gasping at every distant howl, unaware that real danger now mirrored his fiction. He boasted of having seen the spirit of a long-dead trapper in the northern woods, claiming it had whispered secrets of buried gold, and a few daring villagers ventured closer, lanterns trembling against the deepening cold. "You'll find nothing but snow and silence, Caleb," his father said one dusk, chopping firewood. "But the town may not forgive a boy when the wolves come for real." Caleb laughed, shaking snow from his boots, thinking the warning only made the stories more thrilling, yet a small ache of unease pricked his heart, like frost on bare skin. Late one night, a scream echoed from the Miller farm, piercing the icy wind, and villagers rushed to find the barn doors flung open, hay scattered, and a single goat missing, its tracks vanishing into shadow. The whispers turned into murmurs of suspicion, and while most blamed nature or misfortune, some cast sharp glances at Caleb, noting his frequent visits to the river, forest, and barnyards before each new tale. He claimed to have chased away the thief, a shadow spirit, and a few nervous children nodded, wide-eyed, grateful for his courage, not realizing that the story had become a trap he could not easily escape. The older boys began daring one another to follow him into the woods to test his claims, and Caleb led them through twisting trails, heart racing, feeling the pulse of excitement mingled with fear. Night air was sharp against his face, snow crunching beneath boots, lanterns sputtering in the wind, and shadows seemed to stretch longer than reality allowed, as if the forest itself leaned in to listen. Then came the night the fire in the meeting house went out unexpectedly, smoke curling through open windows, as Caleb narrated of the spirit who walked among men, punishing liars, and the adults shivered despite the hearth. Footsteps echoed behind him in the forest one evening, deliberate and heavy, and Caleb paused, breath caught in his chest, realizing that stories can call forth more than imagination, that the woods sometimes answer in kind. A flock of crows circled low over the valley, dark wings slicing moonlight, and villagers whispered of an omen, blaming Caleb's words, and the boy could feel admiration and dread wrestling inside him, a storm he had conjured from lies. By winter's depth, people avoided the ridge where Caleb often played, and some claimed they heard whispers in the wind repeating his stories, like echoes grown wild, and the boy began to notice the weight of his tales pressing against him. One night, he stumbled across a frozen creek, lantern shivering in his hand, and the reflection in the ice did not match his face, twisted instead with fear and something he had never imagined, as if the forest mirrored his growing deceit. The villagers started to leave torches outside cabins at night, chains rattling on gates, and all the while Caleb's heart thumped with a mixture of pride and an unfamiliar dread that he might have gone too far. His father finally confronted him, hand on shoulder, eyes hard beneath furrowed brows. The stories are no longer yours alone. Boy, they have begun living, and some truths cannot be undone with laughter. And Caleb felt the first real chill. The snow deepened, and the town, once lively, was hushed with suspicion, lanterns swinging in wind, doors bolted tight, while Caleb wandered the ridge alone, realizing that the forest, the animals, and the people had all learned of his lies. By the last week of December, even Caleb's friends avoided him, fear replacing admiration, and he felt the first sting of loneliness, a hollow colder than any winter wind, as though the valley itself judged him for his stories. One night, a blizzard swept down from the northern ridges, snowflakes sharp as glass, and Caleb found himself lost among twisted pines, lantern dim, breath freezing in ragged clouds. The wind carried whispers that were not his own, voices repeating his lies in tones low and threatening, as if the forest itself had learned to speak his name. He stumbled over a hidden root, falling to his knees, and looked up to see shadows moving faster than men could run, silent shapes circling just beyond the faint lantern glow. A sudden howl split the night, close, urgent, and Caleb realized the wolves, once distant, had come nearer, drawn perhaps by fear or the stories he could no longer control. He called out, voice cracking, "I was only joking. I didn't mean it." But the snow swallowed his words, leaving only silence and the crunch of footsteps behind him. Caleb tried to retrace his path, but every tree looked the same, every shadow a threat, and he understood at last that the town's trust was fragile, broken by the weight of his lies. A barn loomed in the distance, roof heavy with snow, and he ran toward it, hoping for warmth or shelter, unaware that villagers had followed the sounds of his panic, lanterns bobbing like fireflies in the storm. One man shouted, "Caleb, over here!" And the boy's relief was sharp and fleeting, for behind them, the wind carried a chorus of howls that seemed to mock every step he had ever taken. The villagers reached him just as he slipped into a shallow ravine, snow piling around him like a soft trap, and hands pulled him free, shivering, eyes wide, heart pounding with terror and exhaustion. In the warmth of the tavern afterward, faces lined with concern and anger, Caleb's lies were exposed. Each exaggeration weighed against reality, and he saw fear mirrored in eyes that once looked to him for stories. His father gripped his shoulder, voice low but steady. "Stories are gifts, boy, not chains to strangle a town, and lies can summon storms, unseen but powerful, and now you have felt them. Caleb's cheeks burned, shame and relief mixing, as the snowstorm raged outside, and he understood the lesson he had refused to heed, that power earned through deception comes at a price far heavier than attention. For weeks afterward, the town watched him with quiet eyes, wary yet forgiving slowly, and Caleb learned to speak simply, telling truths small and clear, aware that the forest and people both held memory longer than the coldest winter. And when the first thaw came, melting snow into the river, Caleb walked the ridge alone, listening to the water, to the wind, and to the silence that spoke louder than any story he could invent. Spring returned to Briar's hollow slowly, melting snow revealing soft earth, buds on gnarled trees, and the faint scent of pine resin carried on warmer winds, while the town rebuilt fences, barns, and the fragile trust Caleb had shaken. Caleb walked along the riverbank, boots sinking in soft mud, remembering each lie and exaggeration, feeling the weight of their consequences pressing gently but firmly, a reminder etched deeper than any frost could leave. He visited neighbors, offering help, sharing simple truths about missing tools, wandering animals, and the quiet events of the woods, and slowly, faces once fearful softened, lanterns swinging without suspicion in evening windows. Evenings were quieter now, the blacksmith's hammer ringing in measured rhythm, children playing safely under watchful eyes, and Caleb often paused to listen to the whispering wind, aware that some echoes never fully fade. By summer, the valley was alive again, with laughter, harvest, and the gentle murmur of the river, yet every so often, a villager would glance toward the ridge, remembering how easily stories can awaken both wonder and fear. Caleb's father placed a hand on his shoulder, and without anger, said, "You have learned, boy, that a name built on lies is fragile, and respect earned through truth endures longer than tales ever told." The boy nodded, older now and understanding, eyes gray like winter sky, mind carrying the memory of shadows, wolves, and the cold weight of attention purchased by deceit. In the evenings, Caleb would sometimes walk to the river, whispering a small apology to the forest, to the town, to himself, a quiet ritual for mistakes that had nearly claimed more than pride. And in that valley, people learned that some mistakes don't echo loudly, they whisper for generations.